Welcome to Season 4 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to TEKsystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. In a special episode brought to you by RDA, we're going to talk about how brands should evaluate and assess digital partners to help them accomplish their strategic, marketing, and technology goals. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Scott Liewehr, CEO of Digital Clarity Group. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate you having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so let's get started by talking a little bit about your company, Digital Clarity Group, or DCG. Can you tell us a little bit about it, and what's the vision of the company?
Sure. So altruistically, the vision that I've always had when I founded the company about 10 years ago, and the vision has always been to increase success rates of martech projects, right? So that whole notion that 50% of IT projects and specifically martech projects fail, that's always really bothered me, right? So I set out to improve that. So we started as an industry analyst firm, much like a Forrester or a Gartner, helping brands make better buying decisions about marketing technologies. Yeah. But prior to becoming an analyst, I led services teams for a number of agencies for over a decade. So I've always felt really strongly, Greg, that success or failure of any martech project relies more heavily on the team that you hire and the people devising the strategy and working in and on the technology than on the technology itself, right? So our approach to helping brands has always been about, helping make their technology buying decisions. It's always been about helping them decide both on the technology itself, but also on finding the right agency, consultancy, integrator to do that work, right? So that's our focus.
Great. And so since a big part of your work is talking with martech agencies, what have you seen change for martech agencies post-pandemic? I mean, certainly a lot of changes in general, but what have you seen in that space from a post-pandemic perspective?
Man, like you said, that's it's a big question. There's probably a lot of parts to that answer,
Sure.
But I'll hone in on like three or four. So I think from a technology standpoint, it probably goes without saying that the needs have increased significantly, right, amongst brands, right? So many brands have had to double down on digital, and not just, digital commerce, but everything. So there's been from an agency standpoint, there's just been a big high demand as these brands are trying to evolve digitally, and we're forced to do so in many cases very quickly, right? Yeah. I think from an operational standpoint, you and I and everybody has dealt with this shift to working from home, right? And I think for many agencies, that's kind of tough on the creative process, right? So it's tough to create close bonds with customers and easy to mess up your communications, internally and with customers. And so I think some agencies were used to doing, like, maybe they had an offshoring or a nearshoring model already, so they might have had some processes in place, but others that were much more in person and, where their collaboration was on site with customers or on site with each other, I think they saw some more growing pains from that standpoint.
Yeah.
I think another one, Greg, is like something that's not unique at all to the agency sphere, but is the notion of the Great Resignation, right? So that's no joke. And I think especially as we're coming out of the pandemic, it's hit, some more than others. But I think the connective tissue is just missing nowadays, right? Where people's jobs consist of going from one Zoom meeting to another. There's a lot less bonding going on and elbow rubbing. So folks are quicker to leave their roles for new pastures. And I think that, especially in the agency space, it's typically a younger crowd as well. And so I think you're seeing, a lot of agencies hit with staff shifting around and moving, leaving, that sort of stuff. And then I think maybe finally I'll just throw one more in there, which is customer experience and things that you write about, right, and talk about a lot, which is, I think these agencies are starting to really practice what they preach and investing more in understanding, how they're performing for customers and their customers' journeys, the brand journey with them, and trying to, improve that. So I think, some good aspects and harder aspects, as it relates to the pandemic and what it's forced amongst the agencies.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, I mean, given the amount of companies that you talk with, and it really gives you a good purview over those changes.
For sure.
So switching gears a little bit. So this episode's being recorded the week prior, but as of this episode being launched, Sitecore Symposium 2022 in Chicago is in full swing. So let's talk about that a little bit. And, with any platform such as Sitecore, partners play a big role. What have you learned about Sitecore's partner ecosystem over the past year?
Yeah, so I actually know a fair bit about Sitecore's ecosystem because we at DCG has been really fortunate to work with Sitecore for quite a few years, since our inception, actually. And we have a good relationship with their partner organization. So I'll actually be helping to run the partner advisory council and advising them. We help them to capture partner satisfaction and stuff. So I think it's probably not going too far to say that Sitecore is overhauling their program, their partner program in some ways. I think they're kind of going both forwards and backwards simultaneously. I think they're going back in the sense that so Sitecore, I think, got so popular because one of the reasons was they never offered any of their own services, right?
Yeah.
Unlike many of the technology vendors, they fully relied on their partners to do all of their work, and partners loved that, right? But I think as the platform got more complex, like most technology vendors, they got a little bit away from that, right? Because they were getting a little bit concerned that it was a bit of a Wild West out there in terms of their customers' experience, the brand experience, because there were so many agency partners and some of them just didn't know the product super well. And so they started offering some of their own services. But I think now they've moved completely away from that again. And so they're moving forward in the sense, I said backwards and forward in the sense that they're now really doubling down on those partner relationships with those agencies, creating like deeper relationships with the partners that really want to be in business with them, and then shedding some of those more fringe relationships, kind of getting rid of a little bit of the long tail. So I think what I find now is that the partners that are Sitecore partners are really much more fluent in the stack and more bought in and kind of really much more aligned with the vision.
Yeah, great. And so for those Sitecore partners, let's say the savvier partners, what are some of the smart moves that you've seen some of those agencies make over the last year?
Besides those that are working with DCG, you mean? No, just teasing.
Right. Good one.
No, but in seriousness, though, like, let me give you two, and I will, if you don't mind, relate one of them maybe to a DCG offering a little bit, and one that's not.
Sure.
So for the one that's not, I'd say they look at Sitecore's digital experience platform as a horizontal play, right? So it's a stack or part of a stack that offers a lot of parts and pieces to improve customer interaction and customer experience via the various digital channels. But they look to themselves, to their own, expertise to make the stack into a vertical solution set, right? So they bring their expertise in within a particular industry to create that kind of more nuanced, more tailored offering for the use cases of their customers and brands within that segment, such as retail or pharma. So they'll kind of verticalize the offering. I think that's what a lot of the smart agencies are doing these days, creating these solution sets. But so for the one that's a little bit self-promotional, and I'd love to hear your thoughts at some point about it. Maybe not here, but I think that when you look at any digital endeavor, right, there's a social contract that may or may not be explicitly stated between the brand themselves, their technology product vendor, and the services partner, the agency, right? So all three have to kind of work together in order to achieve a positive outcome.
Yeah.
So we know that the brand, is typically seen as kind of at the forefront of that they're the ones that hold the power, and they hold both the technology vendor and the agency accountable for their roles. But I think it's the brands themselves that play a really large role in the success or failure as well, right? And I think that wise agencies are starting to check up on that. They assess their clients, the brands, in
Yeah.
the same way that they themselves are being assessed. So they're determining whether, are their brand clients communicating well with them on the engagement? Are they keeping to their own deadlines that are being set? Are they working collaboratively, with them, with the agency? And maybe there's multiple agencies involved.
Yeah.
Are they making decisions swiftly or even at all, right? Which could really influence a project's direction. Are the client, key stakeholders, are they influencing others within the organization and ensuring organizational readiness? These things are really, these are huge responsibilities that the brand maintains in that social contract, but they're typically the least experienced. They don't do a ton of these,
Yeah.
projects. They're looking to the experts, but they often need to be coached into fulfilling their own portion of that social contract in a positive way. And so if agencies aren't assessing their client performance, and if they can't help them course correct in time, then they could be destined for failure, or it's hit or miss, right? And so we have a program that helps agencies with that. And I think, look, if you talk to any agency after a failed engagement, they'll all point, rightly or wrongly, back to the client and say that the client was a big part of the reason for
Right.
the failure. And I think there's some truth to that, right? But smart agencies have learned from that, and they're working with tools like those we offer to help get ahead of those proactively. And I think it helps them maintain those healthy margins, or even help with the employee satisfaction we were talking about with the, great resignation, making sure that employees are working with clients that are working collaboratively with them. And then obviously trying to prevent failed projects and client churn. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great stuff, and yeah, definitely would love to talk more about. But I think those are some great ideas. Now, from the brand perspective, for those brands that have either already invested in or maybe considering investing in the Sitecore platform, what advice would you give them as they interview digital partners to help with strategy as well as implementation?
yeah. So first of all, as I said before, I look at this as the most critical decision.
Yeah,
So, you could mitigate the potential of a bad choice of an agency by chunking up the first part of the work in order to get some early deliverables so that you can assess the quality, assess the team, that sort of thing. But, all those are things that you can do post selection to kind of maintain that quick off ramp if you need. But as for interviewing partners, which is to your question, to select the right one, I alluded to it earlier and said that I think that software, sorry, is much easier to choose, right? So as an industry analyst, we just look at the market, look at who are the players in the market, the various technology options. We decide on what our definition of good is, feature function wise. So we kind of assess all of the players up against that model and then create a 2x2, and voila, you have like a magic quadrant or whatever. That's easy. But software is easy because you can install it, test it, demo it, etc. But choosing an agency is much more difficult because you're identifying a set of people,
yeah,
right, who all have a particular skill set, and they have an understanding or not of your business needs. They have a culture and a way of working that has to mesh with yours. The agency is of a certain size and speed that needs to align with your organization, right? So these agencies aren't selling software, they're selling promises. They're saying we can build this for you, right? So you can ask a lot of questions about how they work and ask for examples of their work, but ultimately, the best way to assess them is to talk to other brands to whom they've pledged these same promises, right? And see
yeah.
how well the agency has fulfilled on those. I think so. Essentially, you need to hear the voice of their customers, right? And so that's reference checking and things, but I think it's even more than that. It's dig deeper into something like that. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, having been on both sides, I mean, having owned an agency and having worked on the client side as well, yeah, it's definitely, it's a tough thing, and it's
Sure.
tough to understand until you're kind of in it. But yeah, no, I think that's good to ask those questions, and not just a simple reference check, but to your
Correct.
point, like, what's it actually like to work? Because the test of a relationship is when things are tough, right? Not even necessarily catastrophic, but when you hit a challenge. So how agencies can adapt to that
You're so right. I think that's that's where the rubber hits the road, and what like you say inevitably is going to face you collectively. So it's really important for that. Mhm.
yeah, definitely. Well, let's go back to talk a little more specifically about DCG. So one of your offerings is the Vocalis assessment that helps brands evaluate digital partners. Can you give a little insight on some of the benefits of this assessment and who is it targeted at?
Yeah, so Vocalis actually started as our own way at DCG to scale our understanding of agencies, to learn about more and more of them. So I said that, we're helping to, we started by helping brands select technology and then also the agencies to work with to help them implement that technology. But we needed to scale our own understanding and learn about more and more agencies. And so if we're trying to help customers make decisions on which ones to select, and we believe that VOC is, voice of customer really is the way to do that, then we needed an instrument to use to be able to gather that feedback and to benchmark the agencies in order to understand kind of what they do well and maybe not so well versus others. So I had a board member named Steve Goodall. And Steve Goodall, that name could ring a bell. He was the longtime CEO of JD Power, which is
Got it.
kind of essentially, the pioneer of VOC, right? I mean, like that was like JD Power's first into this whole craze, I think. And he actually took an operational role in the company for about 18 months to help us develop Vocalis, where, we said, essentially, Vocalis is it's a survey instrument that's now been used to gather more than 9,000 surveys from brands about their experiences with, I'd say more than 350 to 400 different martech agencies, right?
Wow.
And so we ask a lot more than just kind of net promoter score, right? Which is the whole, would you recommend, this to your, colleague, right? We ask respondents to give us 40 different points of feedback across 8 different categories, from project management to technology decisions and on time, on budget management, client service, business value, all that kind of stuff. So, and then we use all that data to help, number of uses. We can help brands find agencies, right? So we can use that data to help them, make the right choices. But then we've also really found that the best way to achieve our goal, which at the top of this we said, is to kind of improve the success rates of martech projects, right? So one of the ways that we can do that even more broadly is to enable agencies to make use of the data, right? So we can only help one brand at a time if we're focused on running partner selections, agency selections, but we can help lots of brands simultaneously. We can actually get the agencies themselves to improve based on some of the data and the feedback about themselves and others. So we use Vocalis to, capture the feedback from their clients and then help them understand how they stack up against competitors, what they can do better, et cetera. But then I alluded to it earlier, that we can help them capture feedback from their own team members to understand the client performance, which is kind of, we view that as a little bit, so customer satisfaction, like by definition, Greg, right, is a retrospective look back, right, at how things have gone. And I think gathering feedback from the team about the client's performance is almost a look forward into how things might proceed if they continue on this same course, right? So you can try to avoid pitfalls before they happen a little bit. So, and then we even have a Vocalis award, which has got extremely high criteria. By definition, the agencies have to rank in the top 10%. Among some other tough qualifiers. So, and in fact, next week, which I guess will be the week of this airing, we're going to be announcing a new winner, RDA. So a little bit of a breaking news there, but they're our most recent Vocalis award winner on that.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And so, based on this, the rigor that you put into creating this assessment and evaluation, what's the recent data saying? How are partners adjusting to this?
Oh man, I think there are so many learnings. I'll hone in on 2. So for one, this one's fun because no matter what customers say, you've heard this moniker, right? On time, on budget. It's like the biggest thing that customers say about how they're going to judge engagements, whether they're digital engagements or not, right? But it's a lie, and like I don't mean it to be a lie. I don't mean to say that they're lying. They might actually believe that that's how they're going to judge you, but ultimately, that doesn't matter to customers, right? So what our data says is that, the on time does a little bit. If you're way delayed in your schedule, that does affect their customer satisfaction, the experience. But there's like zero correlation, Greg, between whether a project comes in on budget versus the level of satisfaction of that customer, according to our data. So I think that's actually quite interesting. So the second thing that I'd say, I guess the second learning, is that agencies really, and you said you owned an agency before, right?
Yeah.
They really have to find ways to demonstrate value and make sure that the clients understand what value looks like for them, right? So I mentioned RDA earlier, and even though they ranked really high, extremely well, and got very positive feedback, even their clients had trouble assessing the business value that they brought into the relationship sometimes when we asked questions specifically about that. But that's a trend overall. They still did, much better than the average. Clients can tell us how their agency was at meeting deadlines or tackling obstacles, but it's much harder for them to answer questions about how they're judging the project and how the project, the engagement might relate back to some business value metrics, like whatever, growing audience or their own customer sat or something like that. So my advice to agencies is do a better job up front identifying some of those key business metrics that you think are going to be important to the outcome, and then measuring the engagement against those explicitly throughout to make sure that your customer really understands the progress that's been made, because I don't think it's obvious to them all the time.
Yeah, and I think having been having worked in a number of different ways, as I said, I think a lot of times the agency teams, there maybe the account director or manager or something is keyed into the business value thing, but the people actually doing the work and day to day, they're not thinking so much about that. And I do think they should be, they should be focused on the some of those. Obviously they need to do a great job with whatever their specific role is, but it's always be creating value to your point.
That's right. And then communicating that value up and down the chain, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thanks so much for joining. One last question before we wrap up here. What's one piece of advice? You've given a lot of great advice already, but what's one piece of advice that you'd have for brands that are looking to hire digital partners, regardless of platform, but as they navigate the months ahead?
Yeah, so I said earlier, I think just quickly, I said earlier that, to make sure you're looking into the, the voice of their customer, right? Whether that's talking to other brand customers, not just references, or looking into a tool or service, maybe like ours. But, also assuming that you've got a few agencies that you have, that you are deciding amongst against, who do have good references, and you have, talked to their brands. I'd really pay close attention to fit, right? So fit is, how do you define that? Cultural fit, organizational fit, personality fit, operational fit, right? So if you're an organization, for example, that I worked with one over in Sweden. They tend to make decisions by consensus, right? Which essentially means you're slow at making decisions.
right. It's the egalitarian, the Nordic.
Exactly. Then but if you know that is the way that your organization makes decisions, then don't go get some lean agency that's used to working in the agile process and with dedicated resources who are going to be sitting on their hands at every turn in the engagement, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to go well. And likewise, if you're an organization that wears, suits to work, and the pitch team comes in with plaid shirts and jeans and plugs in their ears and multicolored hair, like that, even if you say you want creativity, that probably won't work as well. So I think just, being honest with some of those things are more subjective than objective, and just really trying to make sure that don't talk yourself into something that doesn't seem like it's a natural fit. Square pegs and round holes don't work very well. So
yeah. Oh, that's great advice. Well, Scott, thanks again for joining. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you and DCG are doing?
Our website is digitalclaritygroup.com. And then I'd say, on there, you can find us on Twitter. I think we're at just_clarity. And then, I think we're pretty easily found on LinkedIn and other channels as well. So I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Scott Liewehr, CEO of Digital Clarity Group, for joining the show. You can find DCG's website at www.digitalclaritygroup.com and in our show notes. And you can find our sponsor, RDA's website at rdacorp.com. That's rdacorp.com. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom. Talk with you next week.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by TEKsystems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkillstrom.com. Till next week, stay agile.